In this video, I'm going to be sharing part of my spiritual journey with you guys. And the reason that I'm sharing this particular aspect of my spiritual journey is because it relates to a new channel that I'm starting called Examining Evolution. So it's going to be a channel that just examines the evidence for evolution, and it's not going to be related to faith. And so I'm still going to be making content for this Bread of Life channel, but I hope you'll come over and subscribe to Examining Evolution. And the reason I'm making Examining Evolution is because it's a topic that I'm passionate about, because it did have a huge impact on my spiritual journey. So I was raised in a Christian home, and I had a basic belief in Jesus Christ and the Bible when I was a child. But I wasn't really paying that much attention to God most of the time as a child and as a teenager. But, as I was in school, and especially as a teenager, I was being taught at school, like most of us are, that people evolved from natural processes, from this process of evolution, that we all came from a common ancestor. And so I was hearing that presented as scientific fact at school. And then I recognized that that didn't really match up with the story that is presented in the Bible. These are two very different origin stories. And for me, I could not reconcile those origin stories. Now, I know that there are many Christians who believe in evolution, and I'm not here to argue with Christians. I don't really care what Christians believe about that. But for me, it was something that I could not reconcile those two stories. And even to this day, I don't think those stories are reconcilable. But if other Christians believe that, that's fine. Like I said, I don't want to argue with any other Christians. But to me, I cannot see how both of these stories can be true. So that was causing quite a bit of a crisis in my faith, even though as a teenager, most of the time my mind wasn't even on God. But still, I was, being conflicted with these two opposing origin stories. And so I came home from school one day with a big illustrated copy of Darwin's Origin of Species, and I was sitting in the family room reading it, and my mom came in and saw it. And one of the things that I love about my mom to this day, one of my favorite things about her, is that she has never compromised on this issue. She has never believed in evolution for a second. And so, but she didn't confront me on it at that point. She just saw me reading it, and she went and she ended up buying a book that refuted evolution. It was a book by Josh McDowell, and she put it in the bathroom. And that was a smart move, because I saw that book in the bathroom, I picked it up, and I read the whole thing. And so at that point, I was kind of my common sense was awakened. Sometimes these evolutionary stories that we're told in school, because they're being presented as fact, we kind of don't think about them very critically. But in this book that I was reading, I was being awakened to actually think about how this process could have occurred, and I was seeing that it was not really a plausible explanation. So I started to become emboldened. I mean, I had sort of a little surge of faith in the Bible, and in fact, we had to write a poem for one of my classes in school, and I don't write poetry. This is probably the only poem I ever wrote, and can you really call it a poem? But it was, the topic I chose was that I kind of wrote a poem about how evolution wasn't true, okay? And I was so excited about my poem that I took it to one of my friends' houses, and I read it to her and her family. And this was a family I was very close with as a teenager, but they were very atheistic. They did not believe in God. They certainly did believe in evolution. And so I read them my poem that was like, evolution isn't true. And, excuse me. And when I got done, there were just like stone faces. And my friend said, evolution is true though. And I said, well, what's your evidence? And she said, the bones. And in that moment, I was like, the bones. She's right, the bones. I mean, what kind of argument is that? The bones. But in the moment, I was just shaken. I thought, wow, I've overlooked the evidence, the bones, and I started just again wavering to know what was the truth about this. Now, I didn't get any answers then. Okay, this issue kind of went to the back burner because, as I said, I was a teenager, not thinking too much about God at that time. So that issue just kind of got shoved to the side, and I didn't think about it much. But it continued on with me when after high school, I joined the Army. And so I was in the Army, I was in basic training, and often when people get in kind of scary situations, it causes them to really turn to God. And that's what I did. I mean, somebody had given me a little Bible promise book before I left for basic training. And so I had that little Bible promise book, and I was reading it, and I was memorizing some of the verses in there. And I was really starting to have sort of a revival of faith and really clinging to God more than maybe in the past. So, throughout basic training, I was really just seeking God. And then as I went on in my military training, after basic training, well, I started to, I had some other books with me. And one of the books that I had with me that I absolutely loved was Cosmos by Carl Sagan. This was my favorite book at the time because Carl Sagan just did this brilliant job of explaining things in space in just such an exciting way. And I loved space. I've always been fascinated with it. So I was just reading this book and just loving it so much. But, half of Cosmos is like also explaining the process of evolution. And so it also started to kind of shake my faith again. This renewed faith that I was having in God was being shaken by these concepts that were in Cosmos. And I really started asking God, like, what is true? What is true? Is this story of evolution true? I mean, this just did not make sense to me. And so again, I was faced with this conflict, and I just didn't know what to believe. And it was really just, I remember it was causing a huge problem for me. I was very upset about it by that point. Even one of the leaders, the drill sergeant in my advanced training, was asking me, like, "Private, what's wrong with you? Why are you looking so sad, Private?" And I was like, because I don't know what's true about, this book, or, is God true, or is this book? And he was just like shaking his head, like, that's what's on your mind? Like, so that's, kind of what I was going through with that. And once again, though, as I finished my training and I went on to I was in the Army and doing my job, that issue again kind of went to the wayside because, again, I wasn't thinking much about God. I mean, the fear that had been present in basic training was no longer there, and I really wasn't seeking God or paying much attention to Him anymore. The only time at that time in my life, the only time that I ever thought about God or prayed to God was right before I would jump out of the airplane, because I was a paratrooper. So every time we had to do a jump, I would be so full of fear, and I would just be like, God, help me get out the door of this plane. If you just help me, just please help me. And so I would pray like right before I jumped, but then after that, I would just forget about God. So that was kind of the situation I was in until about the time that I was 23. And I'm not going to tell really how I started fully becoming a follower of Jesus, but I did, have a significant experience in my life, and I really turned to Jesus when I was 23 and started seriously following Him and have been ever since. But so I'm not going to explain all that because that's too long of a story, and I want to stick on the evolution topic. But what happened when I really started following Jesus is that I did have to face this issue again and really figure out what was true. So I just started looking for answers, and I started reading as much as I could on this topic of evolution. And so what I discovered is that evolution is not true. In fact, it is not nearly as scientific as it's presented. It's certainly not a scientific fact. And it goes against so much observational science. So some people will ask, well, if it's not true, then why do so many scientists believe it? Well, the majority of scientists are probably believing it for the same reason other people are, because from a very young age, we have been taught that this story is true. We have been taught it as a scientific fact, and most people, even scientists, have not critically thought about evolution. They just started with the assumption that it's true, and then as they studied, they never questioned that, and they've just gone on to do their research and their work, all with assuming that evolution is true. And the majority of scientists are not working in this field of like evolutionary biology, so it doesn't really matter whether the theory is true or not for their work. So, it's all going to say that the evidence is actually very much against evolution. Evolution is an implausible story. And that's what I want to communicate to the world. And that's what when I discovered that, I wanted to communicate this to everyone. I mean, I'm a natural evangelist. I love to tell people the good news about Jesus. And when I discovered, and really sought the answers about evolution and discovered that it wasn't true and got really firm in that, I wanted everybody to know it. And so I was even making videotapes in my room to give out to people. There was one particular creation evangelist. He wasn't a scientist, but he was a creation evangelist. And he would say, you can give out as many of my videos as you want. I'm not worried about copyright. So I actually had, this was back in the days of VHS tapes and VCRs. And, you couldn't just digitally click something to copy it. You had to actually take the time to record it. And I had 2 VCRs set up in my barracks room in the Army, and I was recording. I had this whole system of recording going on. And when I met my husband and brought him to my barracks room, he was just like surprised by my whole little contraption I had for recording and giving out these videos. So I was very passionate about sharing this message with the world. But I learned early on that, most people are, if you broach this subject of evolution, all it's going to do is make them think you're uneducated or you're stupid, or they're just not going to believe you when you try to share this message. So for many years now, I've been pretty quiet about evolution because I realized that it's an uphill battle if I try to start, if I'm trying to share the good news about Jesus Christ with someone, if I bring up the topic of evolution, it's basically over, because there's no way I'm going to be able to convince them. As an evangelist, I have mostly left this topic alone. When I share the good news about Jesus, I never bring up evolution. So I've mostly been quiet about this, but now recently I feel like God wants me to start being part of getting this information out to the world, that it's very important, because there are people who are lost. And part of the reason that they're lost is because they have wholeheartedly accepted this belief that we evolved through natural processes and that there is no God involved in this. And so my heart is really for the lost, to reach out to them and to show them the truth that evolution is not true. And I also want to say that I am just so grateful to the scientists who have really made it their mission to share this evidence with the world. And there's so few of them, But these scientists, I believe you are some of the most important people in the world, because there's very few people who are dedicating themselves to sharing the truth about evolution. And I am grateful. My faith has been greatly impacted. I don't know where my faith would be today if it weren't for those scientists who have written books on this topic and who are willing to face the wrath of the scientific community, the evolution believing community, who really come against them and try to discredit them. And so it's, a difficult thing to be a scientist who shares the message, the evidence against evolution. So thank you to the scientists who do that. And the way that I want to support their work in what I'm doing is I want to do reviews on their books, and so show people what the truth is from a scientific perspective that is not an evolutionary perspective. Okay, so thanks for watching this. And whether or not you are a Christian who believes in evolution, if you believe in evolution or don't believe in evolution, that's fine. But if you're interested in this topic, please do come over and subscribe to my channel, Examining Evolution. And even if you're a Christian who believes in evolution, who knows, you might change your mind after you hear some of the evidence. So if you want to support Examining Evolution, there's a link to it in the description of this video. Please come over and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.
His own self for